Hello, and welcome to the 92nd gathering of the Adventure Party on this, the 3rd of June, 2018. I'm your party leader, Brad Ludwig. We ask that you peace tie your swords, holster your blasters, and be ready to gather at the Evertree before joining us at the meeting table. Our guest tonight is former guest. He was with us, it would have been February of 2017. I think it was episode 68, where we talked about his atmospheric horror storytelling system called 10 Candles. And we absolutely gushed over it because it's such a great concept and a great game. And Stephen reached out to us, and he's got a new game that he wants to talk to us about before it hits Kickstarter. So you're hearing about this very early, and you can get in on it as soon as it is launched, and it's launching the 5th of June.
Yep.
Excellent.
Tuesday. Right around the corner.
That is Tuesday. Man, the month of June is going to fly by. I can tell. All right.
You had nothing planned.
Yeah. For those of you that aren't in the know, I'm getting married June 30th. So, this month is going to go by very quickly as we do stuff. Anyways, it's not about me. It's about Stephen Dewey. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
And we really want to know everything about your new project, Gather Children of the Evertree.
Yes.
And
that's the new one.
Yeah, and I'm pumped. I want to hear all about it and have everybody else hear all about it as well. Because we try not to do the show just for ourselves. We're sure that people are watching and listening, so we've got that going on for us. But before we do, we're going to do a quick game review, which is what Glenn handles, and he's the second in command here. What game do you have for us, Glenn?
I have Fate of the Elder Gods. This is from Greater Than Games. It runs about 30 to 90 minutes. You can play it with 1 to 4 players, and it retails for about $80. So there's a lot of Cthulhu-esque type, Elder God cultist type games out there. But it's a rarity when you get to actually play as the cultists. You're actually playing as competing cults, trying to summon their elder god before the other ones can as well, while also trying to stave off the stupid investigators that keep showing up to seal off your gates with elder signs. That's annoying. So you are gathering artifacts, you're casting spells, you're embracing the dark gift of your specific elder god, and so that you can be the first to hasten doom before it's too late and someone else gets their doom instead of your doom, which, is a doom of its own. So the game plays pretty cool. So you have different spells that you can cast to do different things to aid your cult. You're going to be going to different areas to be collecting different things into your reserves. However, you have to be careful because if you attract too much attention by doing too many things, you attract investigators who come and basically raid your secret headquarters or your cult temple, whatever it is. And that can really mess your stuff up. However, you're also trying at the same time to push off as much blame as you can to the other cults so that they get raided instead and their stuff gets all messed up instead of yours. So it's just great because, there's a possibility that you might all lose because you have, once the summoning track reaches level 9, if you have not awoken an elder god, the investigators win, which means all the players lose. Of course, if you can summon your elder god by then, you win in the fact that you're devoured, most likely. But hey, that's a small price to pay for eternal servitude to a dark elder god, isn't it?
At least you're not going to jail. No, I got nothing.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to eternal astral jail. But hey, small price to pay. You might be the one that, it gets to be ahead of the people who are killed.
Hooray!
Yes. So it's just a nifty concept because of the fact that you're always trying to stop this stuff from happening. And now here you are. You're the ones who are trying to make it happen. So yeah, I mean, there's cool areas that you can go to. You can go to the museum, which helps get you different artifacts. There is the library. I believe it's the library where you go and you get more spells, and then you can cast different spells that'll give you different special abilities or screw up your opponents. It's all it's a big balancing act because you have to be really careful because it's like, oh, I need to get all this stuff in place so that I can do what I need to do. But the more stuff I get, the more suspicion that there is on me, which means the more likely I'm going to be raided. And if I get raided and I can't fight off the raid, I'm going to lose all this stuff that I need to do the thing I wanted to do. So it's this nifty balancing act of trying to get what you need and do it before either you just attract a bunch of attention, the investigators just show up, or before someone else says, yeah, I'm going to mess your shit up. So it's great for those people who like to have that competitive, that kind of cutthroat, kind of in your face at times, because there is a lot of doing things to mess up the other players. So it's not a game you want to play with everyone, because if it's not someone you can play, say, Munchkin with, you could not play this game with.
Yeah, that's
so there's a lot of that stab your buddy in the back, although you're not really buddies. I mean, yeah, you're all cultists, but it's you're all the bad guys.
That sounds that's a great take on a game like that.
Yes.
And this is Greater Than Games, you said.
Yes.
And about how long does the game run again?
It's about 30 to 90 minutes. I haven't played the single player version yet, so I'm not quite sure how that all works.
Okay.
But I think I've played this game a couple times now since I played it originally at Gen Con. And that game was a complete mess because it's interesting playing games like this with people you don't know, because you're like, I'm going to do this thing, which might really piss this person off who I don't know. So there's the bonuses. I don't know this person, so I have to see him again. But then it's also is this the first impression I want to make?
Yeah. Especially if you're trying to network.
Yeah. Thankfully, everyone I sat down at the table with, they were all gung ho for this, and it was a matter of like 5 minutes before we had the first person doing causing a raid on every other player in the game. So, so yeah, I mean, it can start off just right away, just all of a sudden, bam. Well, that was interesting. Thank you for raiding me when I'm the weakest person in the game. That was awesome. So there's a lot of that type of stuff too. Is sometimes you just get caught in the crossfire because sometimes there's just a thing that triggers a raid for everyone but the person whose turn it is. It's like, but I'm the worst. I have nothing, and I just got raided. What did I do? It's like, it's you're hanging out with the wrong people.
It's all who you know, isn't it?
Yes.
What is the suggested retail for this?
$80.
Wow. But, looking at this, I mean, if you're checking us out on YouTube, I'm not flipping through the pictures now. Hang on. Gosh darn it. I could have my stuff together. Here we go. There's a lot.
Tons of these little cultist figures.
Yeah. There's a cultist figure. I know I saw there's actual elder gods, which are much larger figures. Yeah. So, I mean, you're getting a lot of interesting miniatures that you could actually use for as unspeakable horror in any game that you might be playing, be that D&D, Pathfinder, whatever, that uses miniatures as representation for your characters and who they are fighting. So there's other opportunities to use this as well. So, with a miniatures intensive game, it usually costs a little bit more, but for something that, as you're describing it, that sounds like a heck of a lot of fun. And especially if you're playing with 3 other people that you're good friends with and nobody gets offended you stab them in the back during gameplay. So, no, that sounds like a lot of fun. And when did you get to play this?
Oh, I first played it at Gen Con last year.
Mm-hmm.
I've since played it in the store a couple of times as well.
Is this in your library or at the store's library?
I don't know if it's in the store's library now anymore or not. I think the copy we had belonged to a former employee. I just sold my last copy at the store, so I have to see if I can get it back in or not. But it is still out there.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, Stephen, as a man who has created a fantastical, I like to use the word fantastical, atmospheric horror type game, is this something that you might be interested in giving a shot?
Yeah, maybe. It's a bit larger scale than the board games I usually bring to the table, but I love, horror in all forms, including, anything Cthulhu. So that's definitely something I'd sit down around a table to play. Sure.
And it meets my criteria. Although the older I get, the more I'm willing to sit for a little bit longer to play. So it's like 30 to 90 minutes. That's a good amount of time for a game that has that level of, you have to build up resources, manage your hand, and screw over the other people at the table to try to bring about the end of the world as you know it. So yeah, that's really awesome. Well, thank you very much, Glenn, for bringing that to our attention.
Absolutely.
Something I'd like to bring to everybody's attention is Die Hard Dice. And we love Todd and their team, and they're constantly bringing out new dice, quality dice at a very good price. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. If you use... check out their website. It's dieharddice.com. Look through their selection. They've got the plastic polyhedral. They have metal polyhedrals, and like the metal dice especially are incredibly economical and high quality. They are solid metal through and through. They're not hollow or whatever. It's solid. When you roll them on the table, you know it. You hear it quite loudly. And one of the things that they do offer is a neoprene rolling mat. So if you are using the heavy metal dice, you don't have to worry about chipping up the table with the sharp points of these metal polyhedrals. So if you use the coupon code Adventure Party, all one word, Adventure Party, you'll get 10% off of your total order. So check them out, dieharddice.com, and add to your dice collection. I have way too many dice, and that's thanks to Todd and the people at Die Hard Dice. All right, Kickstarter Spotlight. We are going to talk about our last selection, which I found and also backed, which was Miskatonic University, the Restricted Collection board game, which did incredibly well. And this is offered by Chaosium, which it's legit then. And they raised 106,994, and I believe that was well over what they were looking to get to make this happen. And good on James Lauder and his people on getting this out and funded. I'm really excited, and this is the game where each of you are basically librarians, and you're working at Miskatonic University, and unspeakable evil is starting to be afoot, as it so often does, and you're trying to get to the restricted collection to try to thwart said unspeakable evil. I am going to quick YouTubers flip to this is an animation of what what your base card looks like, and all of the pieces, as you're collecting individuals, you're collecting spells.
Oh,
As
the best thing about this game, though, Brett, is the fact that the resources you spend grad students as resources.
yes.
You have grad students that you drive insane to research for you.
Yes. It's good to be middle management or management in most cases, and this is one of them. Yeah, and as you collect cards and things like that, you can make important things happen. And yeah, I had to get on board with this, so it was successful, and good on Chaosium and James Lauder. But you, sir, have picked a new game, and I am going to once again screen share. Please tell us about your find.
My find is called Spectacular Settlements. This is a new sourcebook for 5th edition, brought to us by the lovely people at Nord Games. They've done a bunch of stuff for 5th edition so far, different sources and supplement books. This one is a guide to creating basically settlements, towns, cities, capitals. It gives you different locations you can put in them, populating with NPCs, and all sorts of stuff like that. This is, I like books like this because I like to just read through them and just see I never thought of putting, insert some obscure medieval type job into a city. It's like, I never thought of, having that. I mean, I remember back in the early days of D&D where I'm like, a cooper, what's a cooper? Oh, they make barrels. Well, awesome. We should have that in the village. So you get stuff like that. I love creating world building in general, and this is just a nifty little source book. I think it would be to have on a lot of those little things that you normally might not think that a town might need. And it's just I like stuff like this. I like these things that help in world building and stuff like that. And I know there's a lot of people. I know Nord Games I can carry in my store, so as soon as it's available out after Kickstarter, we'll be bringing it in my store. I know that for sure because my dungeon masters will gobble this stuff up. They were looking for $10,000. They're already at $30,000. They still have 23 days to go, so you can get in on it. I mean, you can get a PDF copy for $20. $40 gets you the hardcover. Then you have to pay shipping on top of that, but $40 for a hardcover is pretty standard. It's on the low end of standard.
It is.
Days. Or you can spend $50, you get the hardcover and the PDF. And they're looking to deliver March of next year. So, but I mean, they're an established company. They've done a bunch of supplements already. So they've already hit their goal. I have no doubts that this is going to be something that's going to come out, if not by March of next year, very, very soon after. Because like I said, they know what they're doing. They've been doing this for a while. And
I'm sure we've all kind of been in that position where if we are running a game, I don't know if you've run any, well, obviously you've run 10 Candles, but I mean like a fantasy type setting. One of the hardest parts to do is, create a quote unquote living, breathing city or town or whatever settlement, and have it seem to be relatively believable. And when somebody says, "Hey, I'm looking for a coopersmith," and you go, if you've got that all kind of laid out and you've got a good idea of, what's available in the city, it makes things go a lot easier. And I know I feel a lot more confident if I've planned out. Obviously, you're not going to plan for everything, but when you feel confident that you've got at least 90% of it laid out, and you got a good handle on what that settlement or city or town or whatever is all about, it makes for a smoother game. So, $40 to help you have that confidence to run a game and know that you've got your stuff together. And I think that's worth it. I really do.
Yeah, not everyone can be an improv god when it comes to gaming. Some of us are just naturally gifted, but
Not everybody's Todd Roll. I'll tell you that right now.
oh no, not everyone's imaginary like this Todd Roll person apparently is.
I swear I will have him on one day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's like what is it, Better Off Dead with the
before or after Jesus is going to be on.
now. But was it Better Off Dead? My girlfriend's Canadian, you wouldn't know her, sort of a thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, this particular Kickstarter was funded within 3 hours. So they have a definite strong following. They do obviously create work that people enjoy and want more of. I mean, if you're going to get something funded in 3 hours, you got to have something going for you. So, yeah, like you said, $40 gets you the hardcover edition. If you prefer your stuff digital, $20. And you've got a very good resource at your fingertips to make that city that much easier to create for your games. So that's awesome. Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Absolutely.
And now, while we are speaking of Kickstarter, our guest, Stephen Dewey, is no stranger to Kickstarter.
Nope.
And he has a new project.
Yes.
Called Gather, Children of the Evertree. And he's here to tell us all about it and let us know that it is, you know what? I'm going to shut up. I'm going to have you take the floor here.
Sure.
And you tell us all about your new project.
All right. Thank you. So Gather is a bit of a weird game. It is played, it's a sort of a tabletop role-playing game. It has some elements of live action gaming. It has some elements of free-form gaming, improvisation, and a lot like 10 Candles does. 10 Candles was a very immersive game that had some improv. It had some sort of off-the-fly storytelling. This game, has some of those themes in it. And this is a game that actually, it doesn't really come with a rule book. The entire game is built into this deck of cards that run the game. So those cards act as the GM. So no one has to actually take the role of a GM. The cards give you the setting that you're playing within. They sort of walk you through some of these intermediary setting pieces. Not a lot of them, because this is really a world building game. So it doesn't give you too much. It lets the players really build what they want to build. Then it actually teaches you how to play. So when you're actually going through and reading off of these cards, it sort of tells you about, these are the rules, this is what you're going to be doing, this is what you're going to be working with. And then it gets into the bulk of the game, which are these question cards that actually drive the Gather forward. And what the Gather is, in the sort of the fiction of the game, is the Gather is an annual meeting. It happens once a year, as most annual things do. And it is a meeting at which representatives from various kinships come that are all scattered across the vastness of this world that you live within, known as the Evertree. Representatives of these kinships, known as speakers, are sent to the Gather to speak at this meeting, to share information about what's happened in the year past, to talk about what is going to happen in the year to come, to share information, to talk about anything from needs that they have, threats that they've seen, spirits and ancestors, declarations of war, new news of changes in the Evertree, topics of a political nature, topics of a spiritual nature, whatever it might be. This is the meeting where all of that is hashed out. It's really the only time that these, many scattered kinships come together and have a discussion. And the players in this game, all of the players are going to take on the role of one of these speakers, one of these representatives that's there speaking on behalf of their kinship, which would be their community, their city, their guild, family, whatever it might be. They're there sort of as the voice for all of those people, to the point where you don't even have a personal character name, or at least not one that you share, because your voice is the voice of everyone that you're there to represent.
Oh, okay.
The Gather itself is, in theory, is a good idea, right? All these representatives coming together, discussing the affairs of the Evertree, sharing knowledge and all of that. But the reality is that the Gather itself is a very old meeting that's very steeped in tradition and in custom and law that actually sort of guide how this meeting takes place, how the speakers are allowed to even talk to each other, or what they're allowed to talk about. And all of that is sort of driven by this deck. So the actual meeting, it's not just an open, free-form discussion. It's actually driven by these question cards, that of which there are 21 in the deck. And these question cards, the only topics that are even allowed to be discussed at the meeting are these questions, all of which came from previous gathers long ago. These questions are asked, and then you can sort of have your discussion through the answering of these questions. And as the players sort of come up with answers to these questions, that actually builds the world around you. That actually helps to inform, who your kinships are and what place they fill within this larger world. That's the really kind of a basic overview of the game works. I can get into a little bit more of the actual mechanics of how that conversation works. But one of the things that I do want to also mention just in the general overview is that there's also a legacy element to this game, where at the end of the Gather, at the very end of the sort of this meeting, in addition to all the questions that have been asked as part of it, all of the players then will also get to ask a question of their own creation, something that they want to add on to the Gather, essentially. And one of those questions is voted upon by the group to be of such import, of such meaning, that they all want it to be permanently added to the Gather, so that all future gathers will also have the opportunity to discuss it. So you'll have a number of blank cards that will come with the game, where you'll actually add questions over time that are permanently become part of the game, into potentially future gathers.
Oh, that is really cool. Oh, never in a million years would I have thought of doing something that is awesome.
Thank you.
I've got I'm stunned, because that I never would have considered doing that, to make basically a living, breathing game that you add elements to and can continue to use each time you play, and each time you play you add to it and expand upon it, which that's brilliant.
Yeah, I tried to, there's a couple elements that keep the game fresh. That's one of them. But also the game itself actually comes with about 50 question cards, so that every time you play, you can sort of shuffle up a new collection of cards, so that, the idea being this is an annual meeting and happens once a year, but you're not always going to be discussing the same things, so that the order that these questions come up, and the questions that you have, the variety of questions you have, sometimes even bringing in these established cards, is going to really change kind of how you make this world. There's always 5 or 6 questions that start you off, and these are kind of the foundational questions. Things like, what is the name of your kinship, right? So everyone is going to establish what the name of their kinship is. How many do you number, right? How many people, souls, things are in your kinship? What do you have a great abundance of, or a great wealth of? What do you have a great need of, or have great scarcity of, right? So everyone's going to establish these kind of core ideas about their kinship first. And then the latter 15 questions, those will be randomized, and that's going to drastically change how the game works. So if your first, random question is, happens to be the one about war, which is, have any declared war against you this past year with stones, words, powder, or hexes. That is going to cast the game in a little bit of a different way if you start out with people talking about war.
Sure.
Then if the first question is, how many among you still hold in their minds the silent songs of the river, those which we must never forget? That's going to set off a different tone. So depending on how those cards actually shake out, you're going to get people talking about different things, and the world's going to take a little bit of a different shape.
Wow. I need to ask you something, because while you've been talking about this has kind of popped into my head. I've been a part of play tests for games, and there are definitive rules. A card does a thing, or you're playing a role-playing game, and you have a set structure that not only defines who you can be, or how their society functions. I guess my question is, you've created something where there's an element of improv, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
How do you, I mean, because the concept to me is absolutely brilliant, but how do you play test that and know that you're going in and feel like you're going in the right direction?
It's all about putting out, seeing 10 Candles is a great example of, I wanted to give the players a lot of narrative control in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to say, you can do what you want to with this story. But, whenever you offer that, there need to be boundaries, put in place. And in 10 Candles, the most obvious boundary is everyone dies at the end, right? So you can kind of do whatever you want to, but that doesn't change the fact that this is going to happen, right? For Gather, a way to think about that would be that, you can kind of create whatever you want to create, because this is just a meeting. So as an example, in a meeting, in a Gather playtest I just did, I think my kinship was maybe had 12 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
I had determined, and someone else's kinship had 12,000, 13,000, something like that. And they had determined they were this warrior kinship that was sort of purging the tree of every thing that they foresaw or saw as evil, or neglectful, or filled with rot, right? And they were this very proud and lawful order of this kinship. And that's totally fine, because at the Gather, we're equals. Everyone is exactly equal at the Gather, because all this is a discussion. And you could say, when all of this is over, we're coming and we're going to destroy your kinship. That's fine. You can't do it now. You don't get any benefit from being that powerful here in the Gather. We are on equal ground, completely and perfectly. And that's baked into the rules of the system as well, because one of the big portions of the Gather, and this gets a little into the mechanical side, but one of the big sort of virtues that the Gather is built on is that everyone here, regardless of what kinship you're from, every single speaker is of equal importance. All will speak and all will be heard equally. And mechanically, that actually comes out in how the questions are answered. So if I have a question card, right, that I've drawn, it's my turn to draw a card. I'll draw a card and I'll read the question. What great invention or discovery has your kinship found this past year, if any? Right? How the answering of these questions work is what makes the Gather wild. I read this question, and once I've read this question, I think about in my head how I would answer this question. What great invention, what great discovery has my kinship come up with? I'll think about that answer in my head for me, and around the table, everyone else is thinking of their own answer. Because since our voices are equal, at the time I discard this card, everyone answers that question in unison, which is bananas if you've never done something like that before. It is immediately very alien and very, fantasy, very strange. Like we are in a strange place with strange rules, right? Everyone answers that question with their own answer in unison. And then from there, after that sort of chaos settles a little bit, you get into the heart of the game, which is that all of the players have tokens. So my tokens are like little bundles of seagrass that I use when I play test, but they could be anything, coins, something like that. Every player starts with 3 tokens. And this mechanic will sound a little similar if you've ever played The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen by James Wallace, right? There's a similar mechanic, but
sure.
If kind of amidst this chaos, I heard an answer from someone else that I thought was interesting, or if I just am interested in hearing more from another player, like their kinship is interesting to me, or whatever it might be, I can offer them one of these tokens, one of my tokens, just sort of silently. This is the indication of, I want to hear more from you. I want to hear that answer again, speaking separately from everyone else. So we'll all answer at the same time, and then everyone's going to, offer tokens around the table to whoever, they want to hear more from. If you accept a token, you sort of hold it out in front of you, and that's an indication to everyone that I get to speak more about this. Before we go on, before we draw the next question, I get to speak more. So, maybe that player was offered a token, they accepted it, and then they can say, we've discovered a way to purify the water from the river. And they get to speak it, they get to repeat their answer alone so that everyone can hear them. And they can elaborate on that if they want to. But once they've answered, we developed a way to purify the water from the river. That's interesting, right? Because immediately everyone's like, oh, the water wasn't purified. We've built a little corner of this world. Now, if anyone wants to, they can offer that player another token. This one paired with a question. So they could ask, do you know what caused the water to even need to be purified? What poisoned it? They could offer a token with that question. And if the player accepts it, then they could answer that question. We don't know. It was pure last year, but now it's tainted, and we've needed to purify it. And then someone else could offer them another token with another question. Isn't it true that you were the ones who poisoned the water with all your inventions? And again, they could accept it and answer that question. And you can keep going like that until either everyone's out of questions, or if they refuse to answer a question, then they forfeit all future questions along this line of talking. So maybe, isn't it true that you poisoned it? No thanks. And that's interesting, right? It's immediately like, oh, what did they do it? But no one can ask any more questions of that player. So then the next person who's been quietly holding on to their token, then they get to begin. This was my initial answer, and elaborate, and then question and answer, question and answer, question and answer. So what you do for every one of these questions, fairly simple questions, you go down these tangents of answers and questions and answers, so that the players can sort of go down these tangents of, follow this path of world building as far as they want to, and go all around it and ask questions and really, really zoom in on this one aspect of the world until, okay, that's done. We're back to a center. Someone's going to talk a little bit, and we're going to go down that path of questions and answers and flesh out their kinships part of the world and something that they've been doing. And we do this, as often as we want to with whoever has been offered, these tokens, until finally everyone's spoken who got one of those tokens. And then the next speaker reads the next question, and you continue on in the game. And these tokens continue to get passed around the table. I get it, then I can pass it off to someone else. And we see sort of the economy of those getting passed around that really says who gets to speak, who can ask questions as you go through. But that's why it's a world building game, right? You don't know much about the world going in. Kind of the boundaries of this tree. That far below you, because right, the Evertree, right, is, I don't know if I mentioned, it's this massive world tree that you all live on. That's sort of the world you're living within. There's no world beyond it, so far as you know. At the bottom of it, there are the umbral roots that dig deep into the soil. At the top of it, there's the astral canopy, the spire trunk, A river runs through it. And when we die, we all go to rest in the quiet crown. That's all we know. Everything else, we'll learn little bits of the world through some of the questions. So one of the questions, for example, is, do any among you still offer foolhardy praise to Crix, the midnight rat? Right. And so it's like, oh, who is this creature? We didn't know about them before, but now we know there's someone called Crix, the midnight rat, that at least was an issue long ago, when enough to be added to the gather. Maybe they're still around. Maybe there are still people who worship. That's interesting. So the questions will offer a little bit of world building too, but really what fleshes it out are these answers that people they just come up with, right? These improv answers. But you can sort of see this world not from you build this world out not by drawing a map of it, not by kind of being disassociated narrators like, oh, we should have a mountain range over here. Oh, we should have, you're not talking about it in abstract ways like that. The characters already know about the world. We're just sort of seeing it through their eyes and through sort of the words that they say and how their kinship sees the world and interacts with it. Those are the windows you get into the world that you can then kind of go down as far as you want to. So with playtesting, you can have, I've had wildly different kinships, wildly different, groups, wildly different ways to approach that world. That's my black lab in the background going insane. I've seen all manner of different approaches to how are we going to build these kinships? What kind of world do we want to have? And through, as we sort of define who these kinships are, and what they're called and what sort of defines them, that's how we build a world. And so far, from what I've seen, even though I've had these, drastically different playtests with drastically different groups, it all still works. It all still, we come out at the end where, sure, in one playtest, one of the kinships, in a couple playtests, a couple of kinships were like, well, just so you all know, over the next year, I'm going to destroy the Evertree. And everyone else is sort of rallying, right? But none of that happens here. This is just a meeting. We're just talking about what's going to happen. And the gather always happens again, in the fiction of the game, the next time you play, it's 1 year later. So clearly that the Evertree is never destroyed. There's always another gather that's going to happen. Sure. And potentially with vastly different kinships. Maybe just different people show up. Maybe you play the same one you played last time, but they're very different. Maybe you have brand new players. There doesn't have to be any consistency because the Evertree is vast. There's no telling, you might have just fantasy style, things you would expect show up to one, and then the next time someone shows up and they're like, hey, we're the squirrels, we live in the eastern branches, and it's not that they weren't there before, they just didn't come to the meeting last time. So it can get a little wild, but it all tends to work out in the end because you have these boundaries. There will always be a gather to come, so whatever you establish, you can't destroy the world in this meeting. You can say you're going to, but that's not going to come to any sort of fruition.
Sure. Yeah, the concept is amazing. At no point are you ever going to need hit points. At no point are you ever going to attack anybody. It is purely conversational. It is purely world building at its core.
But at no point do you need candles so I can run this in my store.
Exactly. No candles required. No GM. No prep. Right. The only prep you do is you make sure the cards. You do a little deck setup, and you get some tokens for everyone. But that's it. And this game can seat. I think you probably could do 2 or 3 players at the low end, probably 3, because otherwise it's just 2 people handing tokens back and forth to each other, right? I had classify it more as 3 at the bottom end, but you can play this up to 8 people. You could probably even go higher than that if you were especially ambitious. But like I've had sessions with up to 8 people, and that still moves along at a clip that seems reasonable, because not everyone's going to get a token every round, and people will sort of self kind of dictate like who's going to get one. There's only so many tokens to even go around. There will be times when you would give a token, but you don't even have one to give. So all of these things sort of naturally make it so that even with a larger group, like 8 players, you can still, have that. And yeah, there's no character sheets, nothing, no stats. It is purely a meeting, just this like role play scene. One of the scenes from like popular media that I can sometimes kind of pull a correlation to is that scene in Lord of the Rings, right, where they're all sitting around and discussing what they're going to do with the ring, and you have representatives from the elves and from the humans, and Gandalf's there, and all of these people, and you get so much exposition because a lot of these people you've never heard of before. You have no idea where they're from or who they are or how their group sees the world, but they're here, and sort of how they communicate and the things that they say and how they respond to each other, that sort of makes these relationships grow. And that's what Gather's all about. Like, you come into this not having any idea about the world, about who you are, who these other people are. And by the end, you'll have allies, you'll have trade partners, you'll have enemies, you'll have someone who's been attacking you, someone who's going to come to your aid and assist with that, right? All of this stuff just gets established at table as you play, just out of nowhere. In a relatively, it's improv with a safety vest on, right? It's improv with a life jacket, because there's a lot of rules in the game where even if you're not super strong at improv, the game supports that and can still have you be a part of the game in really interesting ways.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how much time do you get to form your answer?
So your full answer, potentially your full answer, a lot of time, but your initial answer, your gut answer, not much time, right?
Yeah.
Because you have the player is going to read the question, and then they are going to think about an answer that they want to give. And the answers that are given to this initial thing, they're meant to be short. They're meant to be brief. You're meant to kind of keep it within the confines of what everyone else says. So you don't need to have your elaboration ready. You can just give, and a lot of the questions are actually formed in a way that some of them are yes/no questions. Some of them are like, how many do you number? That's easy. You just come up with a number. It doesn't have to be perfect. 100, 1,000, whatever you want to do. And what's nice is when you give those answers, it's all in unison. So really, chances are no one's going to hear you anyway. Right. So you sort of have this safety wall you can hide behind where you're just like 1,000, right? You don't know. Who knows? If someone then offers you a token, and you're like, I really do not have a good answer for this. Like, I don't know. I haven't really, you can turn it away. Right. So you have a safety mechanism there. No one's going to force you to talk. But if you're like, no, 100, I think I could say something about that. You take it and then you say, yes, there are 100 of us. There used to be more, but a lot of us died recently. I don't know, make something up. And then someone could ask a question like, how did you all die? And you're like, and you have a couple seconds to think. You can take it if you want to answer it. Think about it for a couple seconds, and your answers don't have to be these long, elaborate answers like plague took out many of us. Oh, interesting. Where did the plague come from? All right. So you're getting these prompts from the deck, from other players. No one's just saying, tell us about your kinship. That never happens. It's always very specific questions about your kinship that all you need to do is give an answer to them, right? And that's actually a lot easier than just making things up. It's a step towards ease and safety, with that always present with that option to turn an offering away if you're not ready to answer it. And then, of course, if you're the one asking a question, because it goes around, if you're the one asking a question, you have all the time you need. to think about it, right? Because every individual player, they can read, you can think until you're ready to answer, and then everyone answers when you discard the card. So there are some mechanisms that are built in to have the game be accessible to people, even if you're not a strong improviser. But as you play more and more, you get more questions, you talk more about your kinship, you're going to know more about them. Like, things will begin to solidify themselves in your head. And there will be times when you're not offered a token and you're like, I had things to say about that. I had one, and that is intentional. That's an intentional sort of emotional reaction, because you are trying to make, this is a game about being heard. It's a game about getting this information about your kinship, the people that you're there to represent. No one else is there for your people. Like, you are the only one there for your people. And you start getting emotionally attached to making sure that your voice is heard, because it's all of their voices. So if someone comes back to, if finally you get one in a later round, you're going to start trying to weave in all the things that you were thinking about for previous questions. And suddenly you've got loads to talk about, even if other players may not always know it. So there are some kind of baked in mechanisms to really help support that, to get you constantly thinking about it. And there's sort of a very slow lead into this game where you talk about the Evertree, the world, you get the setting, there's a guided walkthrough of the very first question, which is, what is your kinship called? And that's the only question you actually answer around the circle one by one. So everyone gets a chance to say the name of their kinship. And then as you're learning, because you're learning how to do it, and then everyone says that name again in unison, and you sort of dive in to the actual game. But that slow lead in is really intended to kind of, so by the time you actually get to the questions, you're in the mind space of, you're in the world.
Sure. Okay.
And that helps a little bit.
I had a couple other questions. Yeah. You mentioned the world tree, and it made me think of Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Is that part of the draw of how you came up with the Evertree, or?
It was definitely an inspiration. Yggdrasil, or however you pronounce that, was definitely an inspiration for the idea of a world tree. It actually wasn't a tree initially. It sort of was. There wasn't really a setting at all to it. But I determined that I needed just a little bit more setting to give people some boundaries about what the world was, and it wasn't as just a blank slate, because then people went really off the walls, because there were and that was a little harder. It clashed a little more. Now everyone's along a theme of something that could potentially exist in this world. But I was actually thinking about the game's structure. And before the idea of a world tree ever occurred to me, I was thinking about the game structure. And the game, what made sense to me is thinking of it like a tree. Because you have the setting and you have the rules first, and those are the roots of the game. And then the questions form the trunk. So you have your question. And then you have answers, which are all the little branches. And and then you follow these branches out, asking questions and answers. You build out one of these branches, and then you're back to the base. And then you build out another branch, and then you're back to the base, and build out another branch, and you're back to the base. And you go down all these branches. And then once all the branches have been explored, you go up the next step of the trunk with the next question. Branches, trunk, branches. And that's how you build the game. Like, that's how the game works. That's sort of when I was mapping out how you're building this, the path through which you're building this world, that's how you're doing it. You're going up this core of questions, and then all of these questions and answers branch off in a million different directions. And I'm like, it's like a tree. And then I thought, well, I need a setting for the game that actually would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Right? I'm familiar with the idea of a world tree through Norse mythology and through other, fantastic mythology of, elves living in trees and all manner of things. It's present in a lot of ways in literature and in, fantasy and things like that. So that just fell into place in a way that it felt like, oh, that was the theme. I had forgotten. I was lost from it for a while, but I found it again. Like, it just fit so perfectly. So that's how the world tree came to be.
I did have a question too with, you know, I guess your overall goal, especially if you're interested in improv and storytelling and you know, practicing the craft in the structure of the game. Would you say, and while you were talking about it, it kind of occurred to me, would body language and your presentation of the answer, have you found in playtesting, did that draw people in? Did you see perhaps people get more opportunities to get tokens to expand upon their answers?
So body language has taken a really interesting place around the table in a lot of the playtests, because this is a game that is a conversation that is very carefully guided based on the rules and restrictions of how this conversation can happen. There are specific times when you're allowed to speak, and how you're allowed to speak. So this isn't something that's baked into the rules of the system, but you do see in game sessions that people will start to adopt a more elaborate sort of system of body language because they have no other way to communicate with everyone else, right? So when you're refusing a token, for example, like, you can just sort of put your hand out, or you can be like, right, you know, depending on how
Sure.
people, you know, I had one player in a playtest that would always cover their eyes and sort of shake it away, and it was all like character building and like things that were never really expressly explained or you were told to do, but were evocative of these different groups and how they, you know, handled these things. So that is something, while it's not baked into the rules system, that is something that I have seen sort of naturally come out and play, because I feel when you're restricted in how you can talk, you sort of go to whatever other means you can. And that's a little bit intended, not specifically for that, but right, what we're talking about here is a meeting, you know, in which you are bound by these rules and traditions and laws that were created by people a long time ago that have no knowledge of who you are or what the current issues of the tree are, right? This system of how the gather works might be and perhaps is horribly outdated, and completely ineffective and miserable to deal with, but it's one that everyone has to sort of follow. Sure. So you start to see people, you know, bend things a little bit or interact in ways that might be a little on the edge because they're trying to sort of push the boundaries here a little bit, because there's no GM, there's no penalty if we break the rules. We just sort of, that's all we have to go off of. Sure. So people start to like bend and push it a little bit on occasion, and it's always very interesting when that happens. So there can be, so things like body language play a big role usually, and just that's totally natural. That's not baked into the rules at all.
No, that's really cool. I am absolutely blown away by this concept. You know, and I know a friend of mine has the rules for the Baron Munchausen game, and it's always been something that we're like, God, you know, we should really do that, because a lot of us are, you know, have either run games, written books, and other creative endeavors. So we've always thought that, oh man, we would have one heck of a game. So I'm so on board with this, and when this hits Kickstarter, you will be seeing my money immediately.
Thank you.
I guarantee you that, because this is something I definitely will bring to the game table.
Hey, there it is.
Yep. There.
Yeah. Some of us have played it, Brad.
Oh, curse you!
With the writer.
Oh wow!
Oh really?
Yeah. Many years before that. So.
Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely some elements, that I pull from, or I should say that were inspired by games like that. The legacy element, for example. So at the end of the game, you kind of vote on who told the best story. I believe is one of the mechanics with Baron Munchausen. But here you vote with your tokens, the tokens that have been passed around all game, on whose question will be permanently added to the gather to come, right? So there's a little bit of that element, choosing, giving tokens to allow people to speak more and to, get more elaboration out of them. But there's a little bit more, support that's also offered here. Even if you're not a great improviser or can't make up stories sort of off the top of your head, there's everything's sort of driven here by questions, so that can be really helpful. James Walsh's Baron Munchausen, that was a big inspiration. Microscope by Ben Robbins, right? Because that's all about sort of creating a world and really zooming in on the ones that are interesting to you. The Quiet Year by Avery Alder, because that's all about, that's a card-driven game too, where you've got a deck that asks you questions that you sort of build out this community over the course of, one quiet year, the quiet year for your community. All of those games sort of in waves have inspired, either the mechanics or kind of the feel of the game, the thematic feel of it. But it is sort of it stands alone on a lot of the weirder aspects of the game and the setting and things like that. So I'm really excited for it. It's going to come out. I brought on an artist, Nicole Gustafson, who's going to be doing all of the art for the game. And I actually found her kind of by accident, but all of her artwork, or a lot of her, the themes in her artwork are like cities and buildings in beautiful, fantastic, trees, and which just fits perfectly with kind of the gather aesthetic. So she's going to be contributing beautiful art to the game. I also have a handful of independent game designers who are stretch goal designers, who are actually going to each be adding a few extra question cards to the game, and also potentially some replacement cards for some of the setting cards in the game. So while you'll always be playing on the Evertree, what the boundaries of that world are, or the things that you need to know about before you dive in, may change depending on if you want to play with one of these other kind of setting variants. So there's some great designers, Megan Baker, Emily Care-Boss, Caitlin Bell, Caroline Murphy, a couple others, Hannah Schaefer, right? So some great, really fantastic designers that are going to be coming on board for that. Hopefully, if the Kickstarter does well, you'll get to play with even more variation from session to session as you go through. So I'm really hoping it'll come out well. It's just going to be basically a box with cards in it, which is a new creation for me. But I think it's going to, if everything comes together, it's going to be a gorgeous game. Really, small, hopefully fairly small packaging, so you can just throw it in your backpack. No book you need to read through. You just, set up the deck and you're good to go.
And I cyber stalked you a little bit, and I found your Patreon page. And
yes.
Is this some of the art? If you're watching us on YouTube, I pulled up your Patreon page where you kind of teased the release or this project of Gather.
Yeah, so while that won't be final artwork for the game, that is by Nicole Gustafson, who is, so with her permission, I'm using some of her art to sort of advertise what the art of the game, the style of the art of the game will sort of look like. So that's her artwork. So right away, right, you can see it sort of perfectly fits with the idea. In this case, it's a lot of little trees or a lot of big trees, but for ours purposes, it'll just be one big tree. Sure. But she'll be doing the box artwork for the box that the game comes in, as well as the card back artwork on the backs of all the cards. So I'm really excited to work with her. All of the final artwork will be funded by the Kickstarter, but on the Kickstarter page, once it launches, you'll be able to see kind of a lot of the artwork that she's done, just to kind of get an idea for the sort of artwork she's going to be, contributing to the project. So, but that's just an example there, but I'm pretty excited to work with her.
Now, let's say that this is successfully funded, and I have no doubt that that will happen.
Fingers crossed.
Any thoughts as to future possible expansions, future maybe extra cards with questions to add to this?
There's always the possibility for something like that. I'm not sure exactly what shape that will take. I don't know. For all I know, this project might do so well that I'll kind of be able to get all of the expansions I would ever want to get done as part of the core game, which would be fantastic. I'm always of the mind that if I never have to put out an expansion because everything's there already, all the better. One thing that I have considered potentially down the road is releasing other follow-up games of Gather.
Mm-hmm.
but not Children of the Evertree. Potentially Gather in another setting.
Sure, yeah.
Right, so it's still the same sort of concept of the questions and the answers in the meeting, but it's of groups in a very different world, whether that is political groups in a sci-fi setting meeting over some diplomatic sort of summit, discussing the affairs of a particularly rambunctious solar system, or if that is one of the ones I tossed around was Gather Dwellers in the Great House, which is a game where you play as mice or other small rodents or insects or other beings that live in a great manor house that are coming together for their annual meeting to discuss the affairs of things like the cat and scrap food and other things that might pose a threat to you, right? The same format of the game, essentially, but a very different setting. So if this game does well, that probably you'd be even more likely to see a sort of a reimagining of Gather, but in a different setting, because this sort of game, I think, could be applied to a lot of different various worlds and settings, and to bring different sort of conversations to the table. But we'll see how this does and sort of go from there.
Yeah, it would lend itself to, like post-apocalyptic setting or all sorts of there's a great deal of possibilities there. This to me falls under that wonderful category of it's so simple it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's just a conversation, like,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of fantasy literature, movies, things like that, where you have a meeting like this, where finally all of the big heads of the different kingdoms or the different organizations, they finally all get in a room together and hash this out. It's such a staple of the sort of literature and media that I love. So this just felt like a game that should exist. Something to kind of guide those sorts of meetings or to let you kind of have your own around the table. And that's why I say it's kind of got elements of live action role playing to it, because even though you're not putting on costumes, although you certainly could, this is a game where, like, when you flip that first card, you're in it. Like, you are your representative character start to finish for this game. There's no real, you don't have to roll dice. You don't have to check a character sheet or check the rules. Like, you're just, there are now rules about how we can talk around the table, and that sort of forces you to be, kind of thrown into this immersion of this world, so you can really get in that scene, that gathering scene, and see what comes of it.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay. Now Tuesday can't get here fast.
Yeah. Please, I take as much time as it needs, because I still have some final things I need to do. But yeah, no, it'll be exciting. I'm excited to see reactions. I think a lot of people, a lot of folks who kind of are familiar with 10 Candles sort of gave me a brand of these dark, sad games, and this one's very much not that, right? This is not a game where everyone dies at the end, but it is still an evocative and immersive game, like 10 Candles is, that'll really sit with you and tell a really interesting story. And those are the games I really love to make. This one's not going to make you cry necessarily, but it'll hit you in interesting ways and tell an interesting story. So I'm hoping that people will sort of see that crossover of, like, this is still is still a game that you will enjoy. But it, just like 10 Candles, it's a weird one. Like 10 Candles, a lot of people were like, I don't know why I'd ever want to play a game where I know how it ends and I'm just gonna die. Like, and there's candles. That's weird. Like, this game is more weird in a lot of ways, but it's still good. Like, you took a risk with me for 10 Candles. Take one for Gather. I promise you won't be disappointed. It's a weird gaming experience, but it's one that sits with you too. So I think folks will enjoy it.
I think and I hate to use the cliche, but at the end of the day, if you're not a person who just likes hack and slash type play, and you enjoy being a part of a thing, adding to a setting, having a conversation and getting into a character, this would be a game that you would constantly be playing, and it would never, I don't want to say never, but it most likely will not be the same. You won't get the same answers all the time. And for people who are very creative, they won't fall back on maybe an answer that they gave last time, or a particular, group of the people, the clan of that are at the Gather, as it were. They will come up with something new every time, and it will be a fresh game each time you crack it open. And that's what you would want. You don't want a stagnant, boring game. And this definitely requires you to be thinking. Yeah, I could see a lot of applications for using this for teaching improv, or teaching story writing, or, teaching skills about and for the purpose of creating a setting for people to actively engage in.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great, 10 Candles, I always pitch as sort of like, this is a great game to kind of cross you over into story games, even if you're really familiar with hack and slash. Like, you're still rolling dice, you still got a character. This is kind of a good next step if you want to get into free-form style role-playing games or live-action role-playing games. Like, this is a good step. You don't have to get up and move around. There's no foam swords, although, like, I love games like that. You're right. I'm totally a fan of those. But this is a nice, good, like, step in that direction of, like, you're not going to be doing anything but talking and role-playing and interacting with people. But you can sit around a table and, like, do it comfortably. So you have all of that, but you've got that safety harness on. So it's there to kind of support you and ease you into that style of play.
Sure. So, like, whereas 10 Candles might have been more like Pathfinder to a certain degree, this is kind of more like Fate Core, where it is strictly narrative driven. Even though you have Fate Core, obviously you have a character sheet, but and there is some dice rolling, but not much if it's done well. So I really look forward to having opportunities where you have an immersive storytelling experience and there's not a whole lot of dice rolling, and it's just everybody's giving and taking and going back and forth, and you really feel like you're building this world and exploring it. And those are the magical games that you really remember when you play them. So I'm really looking forward to adding this to my game library. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be great. I know personally, whenever I see something on Kickstarter or another game come out, it's like, I already kind of have a game that works like that, or I already have something that kind of fits that in my, is this better? Is this worse? Is this what, like, I'm really hoping to deliver something here that's like, you have nothing else like this in your collection, right? This is very unique. And every time you bring it to the table, people will be like, what on earth is this? And it's something interesting you can share with anyone, right?
Yeah.
With no setup or background. So I think it's going to be great, and I'm excited to see people finally get into people's hands, and so they can start playing with it.
Yep. No, like I said, I could see this being used maybe in like a high school, like theater class or something like that, just working through the concept of safe storytelling environment and finding a character and their voice and moving a story along and being a part of something bigger than just your character. Oh, it's
Definitely.
really awesome. We've run a little long here, so I think we're gonna wrap things up. But I want to thank you so much for reaching out to us and talking to us about Gather, Children
Yeah.
of the Evertree.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
And we're gonna, before we close out, we're gonna give you an opportunity to tell everybody about your Patreon or wherever else they can find, and help fund more games like this that are truly exciting and innovative, at least to me. So, if you would like to chat with the hosts or other listeners of this Galactic Network podcast 24 hours a day, you can go to gncasts.com/signup and we'll add you to our Slack team. So you'll have the ability to interact with us in real time. Again, go to gncasts.com/signup. For more on this podcast, including show notes, contact info, and more, you can go to gncasts.com/adventure. If you have a question or comment about anything you've heard on this Galactic Network podcast, you can email adventure@gncasts.com, or you can leave a voicemail message, or you can text the number 805-328-3966. Again, 805-328-3966, or you can go to gncasts.com/contact. And we do read, listen to, and appreciate all of your feedback. Please subscribe to this Galactic Network podcast by going to gncasts.com/subscribe, or search iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, or anywhere podcasts are offered. And I do want to thank my friend Mark Wooldridge of Central Battery Music Works for composing our theme music. So, Glenn.
Yep.
Thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely.
Where can people find out more about you and your game, Mistrunner and Demon Eater?
You can find me on Facebook with all of those, as well as YouTube for the B-Movie Bunker and Guy in a Bunker Productions, or just follow me on Twitter at Guy in a Bunker.
Excellent. And Stephen Dewey, before we go, where can people find out more about you, 10 Candles, Gather, Children of the Evertree, and everything else that you work on?
Sure. So Gather is coming to Kickstarter June 5th, Tuesday, June 5th. 2018, just in case you're watching this in the future, and we'll be on for 30 days, so until July 5th, 2018. So go and just search Kickstarter for Gather or Children of the Evertree, or both. You should be able to find it. You can find all the rest of my games, 10 Candles, a newer game I've released, To Serve for Wintry Hunger, and more at my website, cavalrygames.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Shifty Ginger, or on Patreon at patreon.com/Stephen Dewey. That's where I put pretty much everything I'm working on comes to Patreon, all of the news about my projects, articles I've written, things like that. So that's probably the best place if you want to get everything that I'm doing and hear about everything I'm doing. But following me on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, Google Plus as well. But cavalrygames.com is where I sell all my games. So if you're interested in checking those out, you can find them there.
Yeah. And you do have a very cool Patreon page. There's a lot going on here.
There's a lot. There's even at one level, I actually run a play-by-mail game called Mantle Warden that sends out mailings once monthly or every other month. That's sort of this surreal sci-fi labyrinthian game. It's a ton of fun. So that and many other things you can find on my Patreon. It's a blast.
Oh, it's very cool. Well, once again, thank you for contacting us and joining us and talking with us about your new project, Gather, Children of the Evertree.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And the next time you have something else, we would love to talk to you, Steve.
I will let you know.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us at the Adventure Party. May your characters never die and your adventures always be epic. Thank you and good night.